If you've been following my channel long enough, you would know that I'm a huge fan of hypercoasters by Bolliger and Mabillard. By and large, these models are amongst the best roller coasters on the planet. They are the dependable thrill, delivering lots of floater airtime and nice doses of strong G-forces. In this review, I'll be talking about Goliath, the one at Six Flags over Georgia. I have to be specific because there are many roller coasters that go by that name. Looking over the stats, Goliath stands 200 feet with a maximum drop of 175 feet, track length is 4,480 feet, and we have a max speed of 70 miles per hour. Because this ride has a height of 200 feet, many will consider this to be a true hypercoaster even if its maximum drop never breaks that height marker. To me, I really don't think it matters if it's technically a hyper or not, I just care if it's a great coaster. Before we continue with this review, do me a favor by clicking on that like button, and if you love roller coaster reviews like this one, be sure to subscribe. Presentation. When you drive by the front gate at Six Flags, Goliath will be the first attraction to greet you. The ride towers over the entrance and travels into a plot of land that's in between the road that takes you to the parking lot and where cars can drive right up near the park entrance. As you walk into the park, this coaster towers over you and looks great. The orange track and teal supports may be somewhat of a standard color scheme, but I think it looks nice even if it's time for another paint job. Even though the majority of this ride takes place out front, you have to walk a ways near the midsection of the park before you get to the ride entrance. This coaster uses the terrain well, which is why your second drop is actually the largest drop on the ride. For Six Flags standards, this is a well-executed roller coaster that piques your interest even before crossing that first turnstile. Presentation earns a solid 9 score. I think a new paint job would push this to a perfect 10. Ride intensity. After reaching the top of the 200-foot lift, Goliath takes a nice drop that will deliver some solid airtime for those in the back row. The coaster immediately travels right into another airtime hill, this one with a larger drop than the first one. The coaster now dives out of the park and into a sweeping turn to the left that leads right into another great airtime hill. After the airtime hill, Goliath enters its most intense element, a giant 540-degree downward helix. The G-forces get stronger as you continue to increase speed until you pull out of the maneuver. Like most helixes on a B&M, this is a gray out moment. Goliath throws another airtime hill at you before taking another overbank turn to the right, sending you back towards the park. The ride finale is 3 back-to-back-to-back airtime hills. This is where you will experience the strongest airtime of the whole ride. Once you complete the final airtime hill, Goliath takes a turn to the left that quickly pops through a small bunny hill that lands on the brake run. This roller coaster utilizes the 9-car train, so those riding up front or near the very back will experience the strongest forces of the ride. Goliath is one of the most intense hypercoasters by B&M. Unlike most other models which are littered with trim brakes, this coaster only has a small patch of trims right after the helix. That means most of your airtime hills aren't inhibited by trims. Also, most B&M hypercoasters I would never usually rank higher than an 8 for ride intensity, but I think Goliath takes it to that extra step. It's no Fury 325, but a score of 9 for ride intensity seems fair. Fun factor. Well, if you love airtime, sustained airtime, ejector airtime, then I think Goliath is going to be one of your favorite rides at Six Flags over Georgia. The layout is solid, delivering you exactly what you want out of a hypercoaster, which is airtime. The massive helix, which is kind of a staple element for most hypers, is a nice change of pace from the airtime, but yeah, Goliath is through and through an airtime machine. Now, the only thing that would hold this coaster back from being even better is the rattle. Goliath can get quite rough. There's a few moments that push that rattle to the extreme. Kara rode this roller coaster once and walked away highly disappointed. I, on the other hand, thought it was the best coaster in the park. As much as I love the great airtime that Goliath offers, I can't overlook the bad rattle, which will knock my fun factor score down to a 9. Before I move on to the next category, I like to bring up the operations. Well, Goliath was running with only one train, which might not be too bad as it can hold 36 passengers, but the write-ups were in no hurry. I counted dispatches that were upwards of 5 to 7 minutes, which is baffling for a roller coaster that only has an easy clamshell restraint. To get my second ride on this coaster, I had to purchase the single skip the line pass because there was no way I had the time to wait upwards of 90 minutes for my second lap. Originality. Well, it's a hypercoaster by B&M, what more do I need to say? For the most part, these roller coasters follow the same formula. Airtime hill, another airtime hill, maybe a helix, and oh yeah, another airtime hill. It's repetitive, but that's what you want from a hypercoaster. Now, Goliath has a couple aspects that make it stand out from the pack. First, it's that second drop that's larger than the first. It basically feels like you get two first drops on this coaster. Second would be how this roller coaster travels in and out of the park. It's a statement piece for all guests visiting the park. Most hypercoasters get tucked in the very back, but Goliath is right up front for all to see. In the end, most elements are not original, but the pacing really sells this coaster. The airtime is great. I say a score of 7 for originality is more than fair. Ride smoothness. I already mentioned that this coaster has a nasty rattle, and unfortunately, it's the roughest hypercoaster by B&M that I've been on. Thankfully, the clamshells are an excellent restraint, but it won't eliminate the rattle. Hopefully B&M can do something about that rattle and make this coaster way better than it is now. Ride smoothness gets a score of 6. Alright, the final technical score comes to 8, which is a respectable score. On a technical level, I just can't overlook some shortcomings that this coaster has, and by that I mean the rattle and poor operations. My personal score, I'm going to give Goliath a rating of 9. This is a great roller coaster, and yes, even with the rattle, I still had a fantastic time. If only the park was utilizing the single rider line, I would have scored many more rides. Goliath is the main reason why a coaster enthusiast needs to take the trek out to Six Flags over Georgia, and while you're there, I guess you can check out the other coasters in the park as well. Well, that wraps up today's review. Until next time, this is X Scream Thrills.